Hey guys, this is Dave with Gazaudio, and I just recently released my review of this, the Blonde V1, which is the least expensive dongle style DAC I've ever reviewed. So I felt it, of course, only appropriate to follow up with the most expensive dongle I've ever reviewed. And that is this here, the iBasso DC Elite. Now, one of the things that makes this device kind of a standout among the competition is that it uses the BD34301 EKV DAC by ROM, which just happens to be the same chip that iBasso uses in the DX320 and their $3,500 320 Max Ti DAP. And it's even being referred to in iBasso's marketing as being sort of a miniaturized DX320 Max. So the question is, do I think this device is worth $450? And of course, how does it compare to some of my favorite dongles like the Hibby FC6? Well, hopefully I can answer those questions in today's video. We have a lot to talk about, so let's get started. In the box is the DC Elite itself. They've also included a short Type-C to C cable, a Type-C to Lightning cable, a USB-C to A converter, and then a nice green leather case. And again, this is iBasso's flagship dongle, and it's definitely reflected in its pricing, coming in at $450. Again, making this the most expensive dongle style DAC I've ever reviewed. So what is it about this device that makes it worthy of flagship status? Well, let's go ahead and start with the build. So if you look at the body, you can see they used a combination of titanium alloy and then some tempered glass as well. And it's probably not only the heaviest dongle I've ever reviewed, but the largest as well. And if I had a category for the most durable and most robust dongle, this would definitely take the top spot. Bottom line though is that the build quality of this device is excellent. And while it is a little heavy and probably going to be more noticeable in your pocket compared to most of the other dongles out there, there is something about having that extra bit of weight and that girth that feels nice, and it makes it feel just a little more substantial. Now on the top is a Type-C input, and right next to that is a 24-step attenuator for volume control, offering a plus or minus 0.1 dBs of channel tolerance between each step, and that's compared with the industry norm of around plus or minus 2 dB. So that's pretty cool. However, I do wish they would have added maybe some level indicator or markings of some kind so that you could kind of see where the output level is, or even better would have been like the addition of a display of some kind or a screen. And then they also have this attenuator guard, and I understand the need for it. However, it does make it just a little bit harder to make adjustments, but that's just a nitpick. And then on the side here is this PCM volume reduction button that basically allows you to decrease the volume loudness level by up to 2 dB. And then when long pressing it, it activates the SPDIF coaxial feature through the 3.5 output. Now, right next to that is a very small LED light, which changes colors depending on the selected format, output mode, and then also the power status of the device. And then on the bottom, we have a 3.5 millimeter single-ended output that also functions again as an SPDIF coaxial output. Next to that is the 4.4 balanced output. So that covers the outside. On the inside is a BD34301 EKV DAC by ROM, again, which from what I understand is being used for the first time in a dongle, and that's paired with 6 op amps that provide up to 280 milliwatts of balanced output power and then 120 milliwatts of single-ended power output. And that's at 32 ohms. And as far as the level output, it provides 4.6 volts RMS out of the 4.4 balanced, which is pretty good. And then it outputs 2.28 volts RMS out of the 3.5 single-ended output. It can decode up to PCM 32-bit and DSD 512. It can also output via coaxial up to PCM 32-bit as well. Now, one thing to bear in mind is that this does not have a battery, so it will be completely dependent on whatever the power supply is of your source device. And I did notice that it did drain my battery on my phone and some of my battery powered sources, but it wasn't really that much more than some of my other dongles, to be honest. I do know that some DC Elite owners have had pretty good luck using the DC Elite with a power bank, and they attach the DC Elite to the power bank using iBasso's CB19 cable. So if that is something that you are worried about or concerned about, that could be a potential solution. But for me, while I was using my S23 Ultra, it did drain it just a little bit more, but I still felt like the DC Elite was generally pretty power efficient for the most part. And then one last thing before we move on to the sound, the DC Elite is compatible with iBasso's UAC application, which adds another level of control, and it gives you access to some additional features like sound filters, PCM volume reduction, DSD filter options, PCM DSD volume matching, and you can also activate the SPDIF output. Okay, let's go ahead and move on to the sound. So we'll go ahead and talk about its performance when paired with IEMs first. And as usual, I tested it with a very wide variety of IEMs, ranging from budget sets all the way up to my higher end sets here. And of course, as far as power output, it has more than enough power to drive any IEM. But how does it sound? Well, I'm gonna tell you right up front that this is one of the few dongle style DACs that have even come close to achieving what I feel could be considered a high-end listening experience with higher-end IEMs. But I guess really the question comes down to, what is it that I feel that the DC Elite offers that elevates it to that next level of performance? Well, there are a lot of things, but I think for me, the first thing that stood out to me was just simply its transparency and just how uncolored it was. Because when I was listening for any coloration and then comparing it with some of my reference devices like the M15S, the S17 Pro, my K19, all of which I feel do offer pretty close and maybe even reference level performance of all of the dongles that I've tested over the last few years, the DC Elite, while maybe not necessarily giving me exactly reference level performance, it's definitely one of the very few dongles that have come extremely close. Now, I will say the new Questyle M15i is also a very impressive little device, although I haven't really completely put it through its paces yet, but this is a great device. Now, if we break the sound of the DC Elite down just a little bit further, and we'll start with the bass, it has almost everything that I look for. It checks almost all the boxes. The bass has excellent extension. The bass notes sound real and natural. The bass presentation is dynamic, it's punchy, and then the instruments that reach down into those low mids and that mid bass area like cellos, they've got that tactility that I like to hear. And then as you move into the mids and the upper mids, it produces instruments and vocals very naturally without any coloration that I could really detect. The treble presentation is also very natural sounding, and while I would maybe consider it to be a little more energetic in its overall treble presentation, it's not edgy, it's not bright, and it never even got close to getting to the point of sounding sharp or becoming fatiguing. So they were able to keep that treble energy, but also keep it controlled. So it still had somewhat of not a smooth presentation, but definitely a very refined presentation. And then as far as its technical performance, again, when I paired this with some of my more technical IEMs like the Kukuyas, Divas, Gaias, Cantors, again, this was providing some of the best detail and resolvability I've ever heard in a dongle. And that applies to soundstage, imaging, layering, separation. It's simply remarkable. And then of course, I also did test for the background noise using my Andromedas, my 2020 Andromedas, and it was noiseless. I didn't pick up on any hiss or noise of any kind. Now, as far as its performance with full-size headphones, and this is where a lot of the limitations start to reveal themselves a lot of times with dongles, but I have to say, I was very surprised at how well it worked, even with some of my higher end full-size headphones like my LCD3s, my HD 800Ss, and my Aria Stealths. And while the DC Elite doesn't offer a lot in terms of output, I think it's, again, 280 milliwatts compared with some of my more powerful dongles like the K17, which is about 650 milliwatts in desktop mode. It does provide 4.6 volts RMS of level output, which is plenty for most full-size headphones. And even when I paired the DC Elite with my HD 800S at 300 ohms, I was really surprised at how resolving and detailed its presentation was. But even more impressive was how dynamic and textured the bass was, because when you put a 300 ohm load on the DC Elite, its power output drops all the way down to 70 milliwatts. And I know that that's not bad. That still should be enough power to drive headphones at least to decent volumes. And here's the thing, the HD 800S does a lot of things very well, but two things that I really like to use it for is for testing soundstage, imaging, detail, and then I also use it for testing instrument and vocal timbre or naturalness. Its bass performance isn't my favorite, but again, it's really great for testing those two areas. And for this being a dongle, the DC Elite does an excellent job of allowing the HD 800S to show off that immersive soundstage. And it also did an excellent job of presenting vocals and instruments very naturally. And those qualities carried over to all of my other sets. But generally speaking, it was really hard to find fault with any part of the DC Elite as far as its use with my full-size headphones. However, if there were maybe some areas I felt the DC Elite could have shown improvement, it would be in the mid-bass and bass presentation. And again, I'm strictly talking about my higher end full-size headphones, because like most of my other lower power output devices, when compared with my higher powered, higher end desktop devices, I did notice that bass tightening up, and generally speaking, it had improved dynamics and speed, again, with my higher end stuff, with the more powerful stuff. Granted, it's still some of the best bass I've heard from a dongle when paired with full-size sets. But yes, I did really feel like it had just a little more refinement and it was a little tighter on my reference, more powerful desktop gear. Now, as far as how this performed when compared with some of my other top dongles like the K17, the FC6, Moonriver 2 Ti, and again, I do have the M15i here, but I need to hold off on comparisons with this for now. But up until this point, my top dongle for use with full-size headphones has been the FiiO KA17, and that only cost $150. And then the FC6 right here, which is priced at $299, and that's my favorite for using with IEMs. And the reason I feel like the KA17 is so impressive with full-size headphones is because of its high power output, which goes a very long way in correcting maybe some of those issues and helping with some of those issues that I've had with other lower output dongles as far as the bass sounding maybe a little loose or muddy. And the KA17 does help with that. It tightens that bass response up just a little better than a lot of my other dongles. But at the end of the day, the DC Elite, while again, not necessarily giving me the same level of bass performance as some of my reference desktop devices, it still outperformed the KA17. And in addition, it also provided more detail, a more immersive listening experience, and it also delivered a more focused image, better instrument separation, and an even wider soundstage. Now, I will say that I still absolutely love the Hibby FC6 with IEMs because its R2R sound is just so unique, and there's something about that analog style presentation that is just so different. And it's not phenomenal with my harder to drive full-size headphones, but it does do fine with some of my more sensitive full-size headphones. But where it really shines for me again is with IEMs. But it's hard to compare this sound with the DC Elite because their presentations are just so different. I will say that the FC6 cannot compete with the DC Elite on a technical level. So in terms of outright detail levels and all the other technical attributes that I typically look for with a higher end device. However, again, the FC6 does have that amazing analog or that natural sound that makes it very special to me in its own way. But again, at the end of the day, if I'm basing my decision purely on sound performance, I have to give it to the DC Elite because not only does it outperform every single dongle I own or have ever owned in terms of its performance with full-size headphones, when I pair it with some of my higher end IEMs, I actually feel like I could just pack this device up, go on a trip, and I could still feel confident that I'm pairing it with a dongle that can nearly push that IEM all the way to its peak performance, or again, at least close. Now, I have to admit, I did struggle with the price tag a little bit at first because there are so many great dongles out there that cost a lot less. However, this is iBasso we are talking about, and there are a lot of things to take under consideration in terms of the amount of engineering involved with its internals as far as its architecture and the design being based on the DX320 Max, the use of the BD34301 EKV DAC chip by ROM, the implementation of an attenuator, its titanium body, and all of that's great, but more importantly, it delivers what matters the most, and that is really, really great sound performance, not only with IEMs, but with my higher end headphones as well. So that concludes my review of the iBasso DC Elite. If you are new to the Gazaudio channel and you like our videos, please take a minute and hit that subscribe button. And if you would like to go a step further, you can also support us through our Patreon. I'll be sure and leave a link in the description. Thank you guys so much for taking the time to watch this review. Please comment on this video. Please like this video. Please share this video. I hope you have an awesome day.